Hello YouTube, this is Kari Machiavelli here. I want to talk about recent events where Alex Honnold climbed the Taipei 101, which is an insane feat for itself, but of course Alex Honnold is known for doing such insane stunts. And of course it went viral basically because he did it legally, he did it by negotiating, or I don't know who negotiated something, but at least it was talked about with the Taiwanese government, so it was completely legal. News reports went there. News reporters went there. It was broadcasted on Netflix, and so on. And as soon as that happened, a couple of days later, there are channels, different pseudo psychology channels, posting about the question whether Alex Honnold is a psychopath and putting up the hypothesis that Alex Honnold is secretly a psychopath. And so I would quickly like to respectfully refute this hypothesis and show, based on evidence, because I've been following Alex Honnold for quite a long of time, because I was never really good at rock climbing, but I did used to climb up cranes just for the fun of it, because it's a very liberating experience standing on top of a high crane and seeing like everything down below. And so I did follow him for quite a while. I also watched his documentary Free Solo, which was broadcasted on Netflix, which you can watch on Netflix or National Geographic or something like that. And so here are a couple of points which tells us that he's not actually a psychopath, but instead he is likely to more or less suffer, like not really suffer, but he has a condition, likely a different condition, which explains the symptoms which the casual psychologist would interpret as psychopathy a little bit better. So now, first of all, how do you assess psychopathy? And so the best way, which has become a convention in the US mostly, also in Germany it's kind of has been discussed, but in Germany usually they don't do this in criminal investigations, they rather do this in forensic situations. For example, evaluating whether an incarcerated person who is serving, I don't know, 15, 20 years or something, whether he's eligible for a prior release or whether he is eligible for a parole. And so the reason for that is, if you can assess psychopathy or sociopathy in a prisoner, I don't know what the term for that, in a prisoner, you can basically make more or less grounded assumptions whether this person, if let out on parole or let out before on good terms or something like that, is more likely to commit the crime that he has been incarcerated for. Of course, just this personality model is not the only way to determine this. It also takes a lot of talks with the forensic psychologist who is in the prison and interviewing the prisoners. And so usually when you want to talk about the four factor of when you want to talk about psychopathy, you want to assess this using the four-factor model of psychopathy. So the four-factor model of psychopathy, which I think was developed by Robert D. Hare, if I'm not mixing him up with the founder of Scientology, might be a little bit close there, but it has basically four factors, right? So the first factor is interpersonal. This is based on interpersonal communications. It is someone who is high on the interpersonal scale, who scores high points on the interpersonal scale of psychopathy, is very charming, is very manipulative, and knows basically how to fuck you over, to formulate it in easy terms, right? So mainly the people who are high in interpersonal psychopathy, these are the white collar criminals, these are the investment fraudsters, these are like the big time scammers, right? A person who is really high in an example who is of someone who is really high in interpersonal psychopathy is basically one of the founders of Wirecard, who is who has been arrested. One of the founders of Wirecard has been arrested. Was a German company that has been exposed for doing investment fraud on in the billions range. And so the other guy has turned out to be a spy for the FSB the whole time. And he fled to Russia, became a pastor, and whatever the fuck. It's hilarious. It's fucking hilarious. And so, yeah, espionage and the other founder of the Wirecard, that's like a little bit of a more complicated topic to get into to psychologically analyze spies. But usually the white collar criminal is, especially in this kind of dimension, is high on the interpersonal scale of psychopathy. And so the affective part of psychopathy, these are people who are very, very callous, who show no remorse at all, show a very high lack of empathy. These are your very calculated serial killers, for example. This is like a prime example, but usually any kind of crime, basically, that leaves the criminal unshaken, whatever happens to him. And so these people, they can't be shaken by anything, right? So I think a prime example of that would be Colonel Russell Williams, I think it was his name. This was like the former Navy or Army or something like that officer that has started a fucking killing spree in the US, like murdering people, becoming a serial killer. And he simply didn't care. Like even in the investigations, you can see it's a famous interrogation, um, featured by many forensic psychology channels on YouTube. It's really a prime example of the pure manifestation, or like a very extreme manifestation of the callous psychopath, right? And so the third aspect, like the third factor of psychopathy, is like the antisocial factor. This is like not the kind of factor I'm really that schooled about, but it's basically people who lack any kind of realistic goals, people who are very, how would you say, impulsive, and they do seem to have a dislike for society in general. Like this is your typical gangster, I would say. This is your typical robber or general, someone who just messes with the world. Like a lot of kids in school, for example, tend to be antisocial. The majority of them only for a phase and only in like light amounts, but the further it goes, like with age, they become like small time gangsters, like stupid gangsters most of the time. And so the last factor you have is the lifestyle factor, right? So these are people that are doing shit for the lifestyle. And so these are people that have a very parasitic lifestyle, that also have a lack of realistic goals. These are people that yeah, basically do things for the thrill of it. And so these are your adrenaline chasers. These are your chronically bored people that do shit. Like this is the kind of factor you would put of these Russian crane climbers and Russian crane climbers and people like that into. So you could argue for a bit that Alex Honnold goes into this category, but there are arguments against this because this would mean, and now I'm going to bring the whole thing together, that Alex Honnold would be correlated to any of the other four factors of psychopathy. And so the big correlations happen between the interpersonal and affective psychopathy factors. This is what we usually call psychopaths in forensic psychology. Fuck it. Dude. I'm really madly stuttering right now. Anyways. And the antisocial lifestyle has also a very high correlation. These basically models, they have these horizontal lines, they have the highest correlation. And so that's why they group them together as the interpersonal affective. This is like factor 1 psychopath. This is like the typical psychopath. And the lifestyle antisocial type, this is like your typical sociopath. So there are also correlations between psychopathy and sociopathy. I think it's 0.066 or something, so it's quite a high correlations, which roughly translates to, I'm bad at statistics, but maybe like 2/3 of all psychopaths also have clear signs of sociopathy. And it displays quite well in the statistics overall because, like, many of the antisocial dudes, like many of your career criminals, like not the white collar criminals, but like the typical career criminals, the gangsters, they also show a lot of signs of psychopathy, right? So being very manipulative, being very callous, being unshakable. Sometimes it gets trained into them just by the sheer lifestyle they live, because it's the rules of the street to be unshakable and not to react easily to things. Now, to get to the point, laying the foundations, you have to know how to assess psychology. You can research the four-factor model of psychopathy there. There are a couple of things you can do to exclude someone from the diagnosis. Like, you can't diagnose psychopathy, but it's a personality concept, so you can't diagnose it because it's not counted as a disease, even though some psychologists, some neurologists say that it is a disease. Some neurologists say that it is a disease. And overall, it still counts as a personality concept. Sociopathy, however, antisocial personality disorder, is a disorder in the DSM, and you can get diagnosed with it. And so you couldn't really put Alex Honnold into any of these categories because, simply put, Alex Honnold never lived a parasitic lifestyle. So basically, living in a van, just spending rock climbing all day can't be counted as a parasitic lifestyle because there is no resources he strips away from other people. There is no people he goes on the nurse with. He just spends his time alone climbing rocks, right? Second factor. Alex Honnold has notably quite a lot of people that are friends with him and have stayed friends with him with a lot of time. So this is for a lot of time, and this is something you see with psychopathies. They basically go to friend group, exploit the friend group until the friend group starts noticing that this motherfucker is taking use of us, so they kick him out, and then they move to the next friend group, and this is how they live their life, right? So this is not a characteristic that would fit to Alex Honnold. And so what is a plausible sign to think that Alex Honnold could be a psychopath is basically that they performed a brain scan on him and that his amygdala reacts less to certain stimuli than the normal person would, so he exudes less fear and he exudes less emotion in general. But this is not only a sign of psychopathy, and the more likely sign, what this is caused by, is probably Asperger's syndrome. And so the reason for that is, the reason why it's more plausible that Alex likely has Asperger's syndrome, is first of all, his father, as mentioned in the movie Free Solo, his father was described by Alex's own mother as being very weird, being very autistic. So basically, his mother described his father as someone who they would call Asperger's in the modern day. You can watch the full documentary if you want. So his father was very described in a lot of detail. And so another point which supports this hypothesis of Alex Honnold actually being Asperger's is, of course, the kind of lack of empathy is there, but it's not like a lack of empathy that he doesn't care. He just is more cognitively unable to understand his wife's emotions, for example, for his wife feeling sad about him for doing what he does. And so it doesn't seem like a malicious kind of lack of empathy. So it doesn't even seem like usually your typical psychopath would kind of like fake empathy in a sort of linguistic manner, and he just outright doesn't care, right? So this is more of a sign of an Asperger because he's not trying to mask anything. He legitimately admits to not understanding why other people feel the way about what he does compared to himself. And so the third sign, which I actually saw, I laughed my ass off about this, but this is the fourth sign, right? So what I'm going to show later on. But the third sign is also how he talks about other people, right? So there's this other free climber called Alain Robert, who is known for basically climbing up. I don't know how many buildings he has climbed up in his life, but he's like the pioneer of this whole style, of this urban free climbing style. A couple of people have stepped into these shoes, and I wouldn't do it in my life because I'm not trained for that. I wish I could do that, but unfortunately I hated climbing as a kid, so I think my time is over. So I'm not doing that anymore in my life, even though it would be cool, kind of. Now, basically, when Alex Honnold, after all his recognition he got from free solo, from climbing Al Cap, when he was asked about Alain Robert, he not only like praised Alain Robert, he also like admitted that Alain Robert has free soloed back in the 80s or something routes that were way harder than anything that Alex ever free soloed. So he even gave praise. So he even spoke like to the truth. He didn't show any signs of narcissism to defend his own like title or something, to defend his own achievements. It was more like a kind of, he thought it out logically, who's the better climber, or is he valid for recognition, and he basically gave the recognition. So like, this guy climbed harder routes than me free solo, so he is insane. Like, he didn't mention anything, so that is already a sign that his narcissism is quite low. And so also a sign is how he talks to other people, like, who share his same interests. So basically, he is friends with his friend group and other people he met basically because they have the same hobby, and it's climbing. And he is very passionate about climbing. And you can see it in the way he interacts with his friends. So he is kind of cool with it, right? So he's not trying to exploit anyone or do any harm to anyone. He's just trying to do what he enjoys. And so what explains the lack of amygdala activation in his amygdala is basically progressive desensitization, right? So this is the way psychotherapists, like trauma therapists, for example, and anxiety therapists, train away anxiety. For example, if you have a spider phobia or something like that, you are getting placed into a room with a spider until you get used to it, and then the spider comes closer and closer. You're training to your amygdala to not overreact to certain things. And so this works for other fears as well. And Alex, over the time, has managed to train his amygdala to not show that much of a fear or have very low reactions to height and danger. And so this explains the amygdala activation part, right? The last thing, I wanted to keep this for last because it's fucking hilarious. Like, it's a slightly noticeable he can't understand slangs and metaphors, so just take a look at this.
At Plunk R19 asks, do rock climbers spray shit on their hands for better grip? That is probably the key. Oh, I thought he meant actual poop, and I was like, no.
You need any more proof? Thank you for watching.